Yes.
All right. Well, we ready to start?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Great. Okay. My name's Lee Bain. You guys may have seen me on video conferences before. I'm here with Joe Vogt at Solvay. He's plant manager.
Yep.
Plant manager here at Solvay. He's going to tell you a little about what Solvay does, about where we are. We're just outside what I would call the backside of the plant, and he's going to take some questions from you and see what you guys can ask him about Solvay and about his job here, and how it relates to what you guys have been learning in Miss Masters and Miss Moore's class. So, Joe,
Okay.
Olson Beck, third grade.
All right. Thank you. How are you all today? So, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do. You may or may not have heard of Solvay. Solvay is a chemical manufacturing company. Solvay is actually a family name. A gentleman named Ernest Solvay actually founded the company back in 1861. So, the company's 155 years old. The plant here in Winder became part of Solvay back in around 2001, and we've been a part of the company for that long. Solvay is a chemical manufacturing company, as I said before. Locally here in Winder, we produce the type of chemicals that go into personal care products. So how many of you use body wash in the morning or shampoo or things like that, right? All right, so there's a very high likelihood that some of the material in your shampoo or your body wash is actually made in our plant here in Winder. So those are the type of chemicals that we make. All right, my understanding is that you've learned a little bit about industrial facilities and that they can be sources of pollution. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and the type of things we do. And yes, it can be a source of pollution, but I'm also going to talk about the ways that we try and keep that from being a problem to the environment, okay? So right behind me, and we'll start at the back end and then kind of come back to it. Behind me, I'm going to step out of the way, but you can see is an industrial wastewater treatment facility. It's not very clear to you, but there's basins of water here that are being aerated. Yeah, you can walk it up if you'd like. We'll walk up and see it a little bit closer. So basically, these are big basins of water, and if you can see it clearly enough, you'll actually see that it looks like it's very muddy, right? But that's not mud. That water is churning, and it's got oxygen flowing into it, and what looks to be mud in that water is actually bacteria. The bacteria in the wastewater are actually eating all the organic pollutants that are in the water from our process. And in that manner, they don't end up in the water that we end up discharging to the city of Winder, and that they eventually discharge to Cedar Creek. So this whole installation that you're looking at is many millions of dollars worth of equipment that we use to remove pollutants from the water that we use. So maybe a question might be, okay, how do you get pollutants into the water that we use? One of the ways that pollutants enter our water, think of our process equipment as a jar of peanut butter. All right? You scrape all the peanut butter out of the jar that you can, and when you're left, there's still some peanut butter in there. So if you wanted to use that jar for something other than peanut butter, you'd have to clean it out, right? So when we clean our equipment out, it's just like cleaning that jar of peanut butter. The peanut butter that's left in that jar is now waste. It goes right down the drain, and it goes to the sewage system. So it then becomes pollution. It's not peanut butter anymore. Very similar to that in our manufacturing facility. When we clean our equipment, materials that were ingredients that were going to be in your body wash or in your shampoo now become pollutants in the water that goes to this facility behind us. So we invest, we lose it? So we invest money in equipment to try and remove the pollutants that are a natural occurrence because of the type of business we conduct. When we clean equipment, we clean hoses, we clean trucks, we clean things like that. That material ends up in the water. We don't want it to end up in the environment. And so there's a number of reasons we do that. Number one, we feel some moral obligation to not pollute the environment, right? There's a moral obligation from my standpoint. I don't want to do anything to pollute the environment. But you've also studied that the government has a place in providing permits to limit the type of pollutants that we put into either the water or the air or any place else. And so the facility that you see behind me that we just took a look at is actually operated under what we call a wastewater permit. When we put water into it, regardless of what the pollutants that we put into that, before it leaves the site, it has to be below certain levels on certain constituents. The biggest concern that we have in the wastewater that we produce is nitrogen compounds. So ammonia or nitrates and that type of thing are exactly what the bacteria in the ponds behind me eat. And when we're done with the bacteria, we can actually use that in land farms. It's used as fertilizer. So it is recycled. So that's the way that we conduct our business. I will say to you that there's the easiest way to prevent pollution is not to remove it using millions of dollars worth of equipment. The easiest way to remove it is never to produce it to begin with. So we've got lots of engineers and lots of chemists who work on our processes up front to make sure that if there's a way to do it, we never introduce pollutants to the environment to begin with. And in that way, we minimize, like I said, just like the peanut butter in that jar that used to be food, the waste that's in this water used to be our raw materials and our products, and those cost money for our company. So the less that gets into the wastewater, the less that we release to the air, the less that we lose as far as part of our process. So I hope that I was clear on that. I hope that made any kind of sense. Did I miss anything, or do you have any particular questions on any of that?
Have a question? Dave, you
Yep.
have a question? Talk real loud.
About pollution, I want to know something.
Okay.
So, like, if you don't have a recycling bin, can you still recycle?
If you don't have a recycling bin, can you still recycle? I think he's talking about like the home recycling.
Yeah. Well, so the answer to that is yes. Okay. Now I'll give you an example. We actually have recycling bins here. So in the conduct of business in our front office, we recycle things like paper and cardboard, the same type of things you recycle at home. But in addition to that, we also recycle the chemicals that we use out in this plant. So you saw a picture of the wastewater treatment facility. Maybe you can pan it around and see the actual plant. So what you're looking at now is the actual industrial facility, and there's many, many opportunities for us to recycle materials there, okay? Now, the real question you asked is whether or not if you didn't have a recycle bin, can you still recycle? And the answer is yes. You can still collect those materials, and I believe you have the opportunity to take them to a central collection area on a frequent basis, and they can be recycled that way. It's not very convenient when they don't come to your house to pick it up, but yes, you can recycle.
Okay.
Other questions?
Matt, have a question about the pollution at his plant? Michael?
What if you talked about this? I kind of didn't hear, but
Okay.
what do you do with, like, some people throw trash into water and stuff? What do you do about that when it goes into the water plant and stuff?
Okay, so there's debris in the water.
Okay. So debris and water is handled the same way that a lot of the other chemicals in the water are handled. Sooner or later, when the bacteria eat the trash in the water, they're not going to eat a paper bag, they're not going to eat a paper cup or something like that you see on the side of the road, but it does end up in the water. It ends up in the same type of treatment facility for the city of Winder that you see that we have in our plant. When it goes there, they use things called filters, okay, and they filter that type of material out, and it ends up having to go to a landfill. So ultimately, it still impacts the environment, but it ends up not ending up in a stream someplace, so that's a good thing at least. In a landfill, it's in a controlled area. People are keeping an eye on that. It's monitored. It's conducted under permit, like government control that we talked about before. So that's better than it ended up in a lake or a stream or something like that. So it is handled that way.
Okay. Kevin, you have a question?
Do you use chlorine to clean the water?
Do you use chlorine to clean the water, or do you only use the bacteria?
We don't use chlorine in this facility. We only use the bacteria. From time to time, we might put something in the water to adjust the pH. We may use some very dilute acid or very dilute basic material to try and adjust the pH so that when it leaves here, it's neutral. But beyond that, we don't use chlorine here.
Okay. Levi.
What's the most easiest job you have there, like clean the water?
Do you have people that actually that is their job to handle the water cleaning process?
Yes, so this whole facility that you see behind me, and we'll swing back around and show you again. All right, the whole facility down here is actually operated by 2 people. And 2 people are not necessary all the time. It's actually operated with 1 person most of the time. And to operate a piece of equipment that reduces pollution or removes pollution, a pollution control device like this, that's also monitored by the government, and people who do those jobs have to have special training and special certifications. So the 2 gentlemen that we have that operate this facility behind me have special certification to do that type of work, and those certifications are issued by the state. So we do have people who do that specific job in this plant.
Okay. Emily?
How does the bacteria
How to
take away the pollution?
it actually eats it.
How?
She's interested in how the bacteria actually takes the pollution out, which.
Oh, okay. Well, just like anything else that eats. I mean, you and I eat differently than bacteria eat, but when there's waste in that water, those bacteria circulate. They get oxygen from the blowers that you see there bubbling up in the water. So they get oxygen. That's one thing they need, just like you need oxygen. Then they need food. In the particular case of the bacteria, the food for them is the organic material that we put in there as waste. They eat that, they consume it, it then becomes part of their body, same way as the food that you eat becomes part of your body. And then they grow, right? And sometimes we end up with too many bacteria in the water. We've got a piece of equipment in the back that you can't see very well, where we separate those bacteria. We take some of those and put them in a land farm and use them as fertilizer. Then put some of those back into the wastewater system so they can continue to feed. And we grow those bacteria on a regular basis that way. But that's how they eat. They eat the organic material in the water, and they like it. It's like decomposition. Yeah, have you guys studied decomposition in forests?
Not yet.
Okay. When you get to that point, you study that. It's kind of like that, but you'll see that when you get that far along.
Yes, they've heard the word decomposition, but not as far as how in detail.
Say that again.
They've heard the word, but they haven't studied it in detail yet.
Okay, I understand. All right, you want to take a look at these ponds? So we're going to walk over and look at these ponds. Okay, can you see it? Okay, so the pond that you're looking at right now is called an equalization pond. You see the foam that's on there? That's due to some of the material that is in our wastewater being soap. So there's some foam in there, but equalization basins are used to make sure that the flow to those other bins that you looked at is constant. The material coming from our plant's not constant, so we collect it in these bins, and then on a constant flow basis, it goes into those other bins, and it keeps the bugs healthy. They like to be fed all the time, at the same rate, all the time. If you give them lots of food to eat, that's bad. If you give them no food to eat, that's bad. So these bins over here, these basins, actually are used to keep the bugs or bacteria, we call them bugs, but the bacteria keeps them very happy. They get fed on a constant basis. They get fed the same amount. It makes them happy and makes them grow. Any other questions?
How do you get all that stuff into like the water, into like where they were, like the nasty stuff into? How do you get the bacteria into the water? Yeah.
How do you get the bacteria into the water?
Okay, that's actually a good question. So there's very few times when we have to get bacteria into the water because it's always there, right? But a couple of years ago, you remember that it got really, really, really cold. It was down to like 20 degrees or 15 degrees for almost a solid week. it turns out that the bacteria don't like that. And because of the cold weather, it killed all the bacteria in the water, and we had no bacteria in there. So we had to start over. And so the answer to your question is how we get bacteria in there. There are companies in the United States that sell bacteria that are specific to the type of food that they eat. So you can buy bacteria that comes in bags, believe it or not, a solid material, and you can put bags of dried bacteria into your wastewater system and begin to grow them that way. But again, these are very specific bacteria. So if you're looking for material that eat the type of things that we use, nitrogen-containing materials, then you buy that specific type of bacteria and add it to your basin, and over a period of time, it eats and it grows and it multiplies, and that's how you get started again. The last time that we had a problem with all of our bacteria dying, it took us 5 months to get back to the point where we were operating properly. So we really try very hard to keep these bacteria happy, making sure they're fed all the time, and warm, as it turns out, as well. Other questions?
You can actually buy something very similar at the grocery store if you want to make bread at home.
What's your question?
Well, you know, there actually is something at the grocery store or Walmart or whatever. If you live in a home that has a septic system, instead of being on a sewer, your septic system, you can buy bacteria at the store and put that in your septic system, and it helps it operate too. Those are bacteria too.
Okay, we've had a question. They want to know if you have any air pollution you have to deal with.
Yeah, just like wastewater, okay, and water pollution. The plant uses some materials that want to be a gas at room temperature, right? And so you can see, can you pan back to the plant? Many places in the plant you can see that there are stacks coming out of the roof. And those stacks are coming off of our process. And sometimes, yes, we have a release of gases, organic gases that are coming from our process. They are air pollutants, and they are maintained exactly the same way as the pollutants in the water. We have an air permit that our plant is operated under. So the government specifies that you can only discharge so much, and we have to prove to the government on a periodic basis through reports that we are releasing no more than what we're allowed to release. And they're very stringent on what we're allowed to release. The states and the local government are mandated to maintain those limits so that they meet the federal government's limits. So the federal government has a Clean Air Act. They also have a law called the Clean Water Act. And those are the things that actually set the criteria that say how much pollutants you can release to the environment, okay? And so that's how we're monitored on that. But yes, we do have air pollutants as well.
Okay.
How often does the government check on you guys?
Very rarely do they come in physically and come in and inspect the plant. But from a reporting standpoint, the laws are written so that if you have a violation of your permit, you're actually required by law to self-report. So we have to report it if we have a problem. If we don't, that's a violation of the law in and of itself. But they do require those reports to be filed about once a quarter, so every 3 months.
When all of your bacteria died, did you have to file a report on that?
Yes, we did. And it turned out that the city of Winder was having the same problem. And so they understood, they worked with us. We did end up getting what's called a notice of violation, which is very much like a traffic ticket or something like that. We had to pay a fine, but we did, like I said, within 5 months, we were back operating properly. So, yeah, we did report that. Other questions?
How do you get the chemicals? Yeah, how do you get the bacteria out of it?
Oh, he talked about there being a machine in the back that separates.
Do you use sand like to clean the water?
Oh, like they do with water.
Do you use sand like they do for the waste management plants to filter the water?
No, we actually don't have to do that. This bacteria that we use will actually float, okay? And we use, believe it or not, you can turn around and show them that blue box right there. You see the blue box? It looks like a dumpster.
Yes.
All right, that blue box is actually what's called a dewatering unit. So we put all of our sludge that we're trying, the sludge is what I call the bacteria. It looks like muddy water. We put it in there, and that separates the water from the solids being the bacteria. And we put some of that bacteria back into the system, and we take some of it off and use it as either landfill or, as I said, fertilizer. So that's how we separate it. It literally goes into this box, and the water rises to the top, the water sinks to the bottom, and the bacteria float to the top. Okay?
Yes.
How much bacteria is in the wastewater?
Okay, so can you describe quantity of bacteria that y'all put in? Maybe like how many pounds, or?
I think the last time that we had to seed the basins back here, they used 250 pounds of dry bacteria. That's a lot of bacteria, okay? It doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot. If you took all the bacteria out of these basins back here, it would literally be thousands and thousands of pounds. But you can't start by charging thousands and thousands of pounds. It's way too expensive to do that. But if you seed it with a few hundred pounds, they grow very quickly. And so, especially if you're feeding them properly. So within, like I said, it took us 5 months. That was primarily because the water was still cold when we tried to do it. Bacteria love to be warm, okay? So it took us 5 months to get that going. But since then, we put heaters in these basins. And so the bacteria are now kept warm all the time. We'll never have an issue with the bacteria dying because of cold weather again. It's very expensive to deal with that type of problem. So it was a lot less expensive to put heaters in the basins. Other questions?
How many gallons of water are in the pools?
There's about 250,000 gallons of water, so 250,000 gallons of water in one pool. In the second pool, there's actually 2 more up on the hill that you don't see. So about 1 million gallons of water in those 4 basins, and about 250,000 gallons of water in the 2 basins that I showed you earlier that were equalization basins. So a lot of water.
Lola, what was your question?
Why do you need bacteria?
So if you have a million gallons of wastewater and 1 gallon of water weighs 8 pounds, that's a lot of weight.
8 million pounds.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of weight.
What do you do at Solvay?
Oh, like what's his personal job?
What they want to know what your personal job is at Solvay.
Okay, well, as plant manager, my job is, there's a lot of different things that I have to do. The biggest job that I have is making sure that the plant where everybody works is safe. Okay? The biggest issue that we have is making sure that people are safe. And so it's my job to make sure they have all the right equipment, that they have all the right training, that they know precisely what they're doing. Yeah, you can see that we're wearing hard hats and safety glasses, and we've got steel-toed shoes on, and you see Mr. Bain back there, he's got sleeves on because we require long sleeves. That's to make sure that chemicals stay off of us. So my biggest job is to make sure that we operate inside the plant very safely. My second biggest job is to make sure that we don't impact the environment, okay? And so we talked a little bit about the money we spend and the things we do and the people we train to try and make sure that the environment is not harmed by the operation that we have. So that's the second biggest job. I would tell you that my third biggest job is really to do the type of things that we're doing right now. There are many, many people in the plant who have specific jobs in terms of making the products and putting the products in drums or shipping them in tank wagons or doing work in the office and that type of thing. My job really is to be a liaison with the community. And so I do a lot of that. I work with the schools. I work with a lot of other agencies in town and try and do what I can to make the community a better place to live based on the type of things that Solvay can help with. Okay, so that's probably my third biggest job right now. But I am responsible for everything that happens in this plant, good, bad, or otherwise.
Okay.
Other questions?
Sophie? They asked if women were allowed to work at Solvay.
Women are not allowed to work in Solvay. Women are encouraged to work at Solvay. So to give you some idea of that, I have a management team. I have 7 people who report to me. 4 of those people are women. My wife is a chemical engineer. Okay, she worked for a different chemical company all her life, and she's retired now. My daughter is studying to be a chemical engineer. She's currently working at a facility that Solvay operates in Marietta, Ohio. And so we very much encourage women to participate in the type of business that we run.
Good, thank you. Let's say we've got a couple more. Yes.
Why do you guys, if you cover
Hey,
like
Robert, then.
every
Let me say that.
why don't you cover your nose?
Okay, so they ask if you have to wear all the different protective gear for your skin, why don't you have to wear something maybe over your nose and mouth where you breathe?
Well, there are jobs that you do in that plant where you actually do have to wear those things. So the type of protective equipment that we wear is based on the job that we're doing and the material we're handling. So standing out here by the wastewater treatment facility, there's no risk of breathing something that will hurt you or anything like that. So we're not required to wear a respirator. Inside the manufacturing building, if they're working with something that's particularly dusty or fumy or that type of thing, and it's known to cause a problem to human health, then yes, we require people to wear respirators. In some cases, they have to wear those big moon suits that you see people wearing on TV. Very rarely do we handle anything that's quite that hazardous, but it has happened before. I want to go back to a question that was asked earlier. Somebody asked about are women working at Solvay? There is actually a lady who is local. Her name is Katie Roberts, and Katie graduated from Appalachia High School not long ago. And Katie is working at a plant that Solvay operates in Augusta, Georgia right now. So she's an example of a local girl who grew up in the Barrow County school system, graduated from Appalachia High School, went on to get a chemical engineering degree at Georgia Tech, and now works for Solvay.
Great. We had a question about, you talked about the air pollution and about you release a certain amount at certain times. Is that done by a machine or a person? And if it's done by a person, do they have to wear protective gear?
Well, typically it's done by the machines, okay? And it's done through vents so that the pollution is released high above and away from the places where we have people working. That doesn't mean that that's the case all the time. So there are certain pollutants that might be emitted, as I said, dust or vapors or things like that, very close to a person. So a person that might be handling those things could release those. Frankly, when you're working with small amounts, the releases are not very big, so they're not a problem. More of a problem with making sure it doesn't get inside your lungs or something like that. But as far as the type of releases that we have from the manufacturing equipment, those are done by machine. And we have a computer that runs all the equipment inside that building. And so when we have when we vent the reactors or we vent tank or we vent equipment like that, that's done by control on the computer.
I think that is all of our questions. We have really enjoyed this. We can't thank you enough, and I've even learned lots today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I thought those were really good questions. I was really happy that you didn't ask me a question I didn't know. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope I get a chance to do this again sometime. So let me know.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.